Hi, my name is Mike Gilbertson, and I'm the Agricultural Non-Point Source Implementation Coordinator for the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. This presentation will be an overview of the Agricultural Performance Standards and Prohibitions within the Runoff Management Administrative Code, Chapter NR 151. When we look closer at NR 151 in its entirety, we see that this administrative code is made up of 5 different subsections. The first subsection being definitions and general provisions that may be used throughout the entire administrative code. There's also a subsection regarding non-agricultural performance standards, so things that might be related to controlling runoff from construction sites, for example. Another one is performance standards related to transportation facilities and controlling runoff from those facilities, and also a section for the process to develop non-agricultural technical standards that more relate to subsections 3 and 4. But for our purposes, what we're focused on here is subsection 2 highlighted, and that is the agricultural performance standards and prohibitions. In general, when we talk about NR 151s around in our groups, what we're really focusing on is basically these performance standards, and of course there is some definitions within the first subsection related to subsection 2. But within NR 151, and for the purposes of most of our work, what we're interested on is subsection 2, the agricultural performance standards and prohibitions. So going further into NR 151 here in Subchapter 2, these sections describe the rules and requirements non-CAFO permitted farms must follow to control ag runoff and protect water quality in Wisconsin. The first section here, NR 151.015, is a definition section. Basically, there's terms listed here that are used throughout Subchapter 2, where to better clarify some of the terms used. From there, it goes into basically 151.02 through 08. Here it lists the actual performance standards and prohibitions that all farms in Wisconsin must follow. And we'll get further into what these standards and prohibitions are in the next slides. From there, the rule continues into a section 151.09 through 095. Basically, what this section does is it describes the implementation and enforcement procedures that we must follow, as we work through compliance and options for achieving compliance with the performance standards. Basically, this section describes notification requirements, what information we must share with landowners, describing their potential cost share eligibility for installing practices to address a runoff issue at the farm. It basically describes, the information that we share, that we must provide with landowners as we work together to correct any identified runoff issues from the farms. From there, it continues into NR 151.096, and this is a section that describes the ability for local municipalities to develop a local ordinance. It gets into describing that where a local municipality wants to, or where a municipality wants to develop a local ordinance that exceeds the state performance standards, the process that a municipality would have to go through to achieve that. And finally, the last section of 151, the Ag Performance Standards and Prohibition section, is a section where if there's a situation where a farm just doesn't have any options to comply. There's just none of these options work for a farm, and there's no ability to comply with the performance standards. There's a process to receive a variance and work to find a different option for a farm that would meet the intent of protecting water quality standards and meet the intent of 151. I think of the agricultural performance standards as a dynamic set of rules and regulations that have taken on a lot of changes over the last few years. Since 2002, the original set of statewide performance standards was promulgated, and this came in as part of the entire NR 151 administrative code. In 2010, additional statewide performance standards and prohibitions were added within the Ag Performance Standards section of 151. Then, later in 2018, a targeted ag performance standard was developed, And the difference between a targeted and a statewide standard is this targeted standard in 2018 focused on a certain area of the state where mechanical application of manure occurs. In this case, this rule only applies to areas of the state that have Silurian bedrock. This rule does not apply to other parts of the state and the producers outside of the Silurian bedrock area, hence the reason it's called a targeted standard. And of course, there's always potential for additional changes or revisions to NR 151 in years ahead. So we've talked about the NR 151 Ag Performance Standards and Prohibitions, but what are they actually? This slide here has a list of bulleted points that describe the statewide Ag Performance Standards. And basically, this starts defining what the bar of performance level is for all farmers in the state. And these are designed, to protect water quality of the state. And basically, what they say going through them is the sheet rill and wind erosion performance standard requires all farmers that are managing fields, growing crops in fields, that they manage those fields to minimize soil loss and erosion, and actually manage those fields to meet what is called a tolerable soil loss. So that's a cropland performance standard that all farmers in the state have to meet. In addition, when they do tillage, and if these fields are near streams or other water bodies, there's a minimum tillage setback distance. And basically, this is a performance standard that would protect a physical water body from actually having just tillage, soil deposited actually physically into the stream and filling in streams. So there's a setback distance for when they're near water bodies, that they stay away from destroying stream banks and filling in stream banks, or filling in streams basically with soil that is turned during tillage. Another cropland performance standard is the phosphorus index. Basically, what this performance standard says is all farmers that are managing fields are managing them so to minimize the loss of phosphorus to waters of the state. So this is a calculation that's done actually in their nutrient management planning tools that calculates different management things that are done on the fields to manage the fields to minimize the loss of phosphorus or runoff from the fields. And this has a lot of variables that go into the phosphorus index: slope, soil type, crop rotations, and other variables too. But this is another cropland performance standard that all farmers in the state must meet and minimize the phosphorus loss and meet a phosphorus index of less than 6. Another performance standard is the manure storage facility. So when farmers have manure storage on the production site, how do they manage that manure, those facilities? There's a requirement that manure does not exceed the margin of safety. So they maintain a certain distance from the top of the storage to minimize the risk of overtopping. Construction of manure storage facilities need to meet NRCS standards to minimize the risk of failure and manure release to waters of the state. A process wastewater handling performance standard. This requires all farmers in the state that have processed wastewater. So processed wastewater would be things like milk house waste or feed, leachate from stored feed. That waste that does not run off and a significant loss to waters of the state, because it can have a negative impact to fish and streams and habitat and can impact water bodies. So that's a statewide standard that all farmers that have that are creating processed wastewater, like I said, feed storage leachate, milk house waste, things like that those are handled to minimize the risk of loss to waters of the state. A clean water diversion performance standard, again, statewide, all farmers that are required to comply with this would be something like any clean water that would be running onto a farm. The farm must divert that clean water away from things like barnyards, manure piles or stored manure, and prevent this clean water that may run onto a farm from becoming contaminated with waste or things that are on a barnyard. So divert clean water around the production site to minimize the risk of contaminating that clean water and creating more volume there. And another statewide performance standard is nutrient management. So all farms that are applying nutrients to a field, whether that's manure or it's commercial fertilizer, must do so according to a nutrient management plan that meets the NRCS 590 standard. Again, these are the statewide agricultural performance standards that all farms in the state are expected to follow and to be in compliance with NR 151. So again, we talk about performance standards and prohibitions, kind of two different groups of requirements that make up the NR 151 performance bar. Like I said, for all farms in the state. These four bullets make up the manure management, the prohibitions part of the ag performance standards and prohibitions. The performance standards, they talk about what farms, how they operate their fields, or things that they must follow or do on their farms for compliance. The prohibitions say what can't happen, what you cannot do. And actually, the prohibitions, these four prohibitions, were actually the minimum level of requirements that were expected to be in NR 151 when NR 151 is created. And in fact, these are listed in statute, in Wisconsin State statute, that gave the DNR the authority to create NR 151. So these four prohibitions are actually also in state statute and then also included in 151. And basically what these say is, any farm in the state that has manure storage must not have a manure storage facility that would overflow or overtop. So just minimize. They can't have manure overtopping and flowing into, obviously, the risk for flowing into waters of the state. All farms in the state, they cannot have unconfined manure pile in a water quality management area. So that would mean a water quality management area actually has a definition, and that's a definition in NR 151. But basically, what it talks about is there's certain distances from water bodies. So 1,000-foot distance from a lake is part of that water quality management area. 300 feet from a stream is also in that water quality management areas, to give you an idea of what is that distance and what does a water quality management area mean. So in this situation, farms cannot have an unconfined manure pile in, let's say, near a stream or within 300 feet of a stream or within 1,000 feet of a lake, or these distances from water bodies that are defined as a water quality management area. No farms in the state can have runoff from a feedlot or stored manure to waters of the state. So, if there's an open animal lot on a farm and, rain falls on that lot and it creates a channelized flow from that feedlot and it flows down gradient to a stream, a wetland, other waters of the state. That's an example of that's prohibited by these by NR 151. So that's a description of a situation there that would be non-compliant with 151. Again, no farms in the state can have direct runoff from a feedlot or stored manure to waters of the state. And finally, the last manure statewide prohibition are grazing livestock, and we can't have unrestricted access of these animals to streams that would cause a situation that would destroy the banks or denude the vegetation, and basically create a situation where excessive erosion, bank loss, and damages to the stream would occur. It does not say that animals or grazed animals cannot access streams, but if they do access streams, it has to be done so in a way that maintains significant vegetation, maintains the integrity and the structure of the stream banks, so that damage to the water body does not occur. Again, these are the statewide manure management prohibitions in NR 151. All farms in the state have to follow these prohibitions to be in compliance with NR 151. Okay, so we talked about the statewide ag performance standards and prohibitions, but we've also talked about the ability to create what are called targeted performance standards. So so stepping away from statewide standards, we have the ability to develop a performance standard that applies maybe to a specific area that has that is having characteristics that necessitate additional practices to meet water quality standards. And basically what that is saying is where statewide performance standards, which we have just talked about, where implementation of the statewide performance standards in a certain area of the state is not protective enough to meet water quality standards, would suggest that we need to come up with a different or a more a specific rule for that area to protect water quality. And some of the considerations for creating a target performance standards would be things like the geology and physical parameters of an area, maybe a pollutant of concern, or when monitoring data or modeling indicate that there's a problem out in the environment and additional restrictions may be needed. And so in 2018 was the development of our first targeted performance standard. And the example up here in the upper right corner shows an area of the state. Basically, it's the eastern part of the state outlined there in black, the thick black outline there. Those counties are the area defined as the targeted area for a Silurian bedrock targeted performance standard. So this is a geology specific area that has shown that is the Silurian bedrock is prone for manure applications, can go through cracks within this geology, and is prone or susceptible to groundwater contamination of pathogens. And so what this targeted standard gets into is in this part of the state where mechanical applications of manure occur must follow a certain requirements defined in this targeted standard. So again, this is specific to those farmers or those producers that are applying manure to fields in that area of the state. This targeted standard does not apply to farms applying mechanical applications of manure to their fields outside of that area. So again, it's targeted, it's specific to that area of the state. And it was as we talked about, this rule came in 2018. There is always a potential for other targeted standards to occur where other problems may be shown or come about. And in fact, at the time of this recording of the presentation, we are looking at the development of another targeted standard related to nitrate contamination in groundwater. Again, it's a pollutant of concern, and there's also a consideration of geology, permeable soils, those sorts of things that are being looked at this time for rule development. So again, it's another example of where impacts to groundwater are occurring, and we feel that the current statewide standards aren't protective enough, and we must go beyond that to be protective of water quality. Okay, so now after seeing what is in NR 151 in terms of the ag performance standards, prohibitions, targeted standards, the performance bar that farms in the state must meet to be in compliance, how do we implement these requirements? What is our strategy? And when we talk implementation, is how do we take what's on paper in NR 151 and put it onto the ground, working with producers so that the operations, the activities, the farming activities are done so in a way that comply with 151 and protect our water quality of Wisconsin. And so there's multiple agencies involved in implementing NR 151, and we have of course our county land conservation departments play a huge role in this effort. Department of Ag, Trade, Consumer Protection has a large role in implementation. The DNR has a large role, and UW Extension as well. And so basically our counties have the lead role for implementation. They're on the ground working with farms in their county, talking with them directly and providing that technical assistance and education at the local level to educate the requirements of 151, options to for making changes or making changes to their production site to comply with state rules and protect our water quality. Department of Ag, they provide a lot of funding to counties for staffing and keep the so the conservation, our county land conservation departments have the resources to reach out to landowners and work with them. They also have some grants and incentives for that can be applied to our producers for installing water quality practices. The Department of Natural Resources, we also have grants and provide some, and will provide technical assistance grants in terms of cost sharing options for producers to install management practices, protect water quality. And the DNR also has enforcement support, and where needed, can provide that additional resource to go beyond voluntary compliance if necessary for implementation and achieving compliance with NR 151. And then we rely heavily on UW Extension as outreach and coordinating and hosting these outreach opportunities in education. So collectively, we all work together and rely on each other for efficient implementation of NR 151, and it's our goal at the DNR to work consistently with all counties in the state to identify opportunities for supporting counties where needed and implementing 151 on the ground, achieving compliance, and doing so consistently statewide. So this concludes my presentation on NR 151, Agricultural Performance Standards and Prohibitions. If you have additional questions on NR 151, a great resource for you to be contact the Land Conservation Department within the county that you reside. Another resource for you are the DNR Regional Non-Point Source Coordinators listed here on the slide. And each of the regional coordinators cover certain regions of the state, and those regions are made up with certain counties. So their contact information is here, phone number, email for the counties that they represent. So if you have any questions on 151, of course, you can contact the DNR Regional Non-Point Source Coordinator in your region. Thank you.